Welcome to Elite Team Talks, the podcast that simplifies the universal principles underpinning the world's most successful teams. I'm Henry Cheetham, founder of Elite Human Solutions. Join me as we venture into the minds of individuals who have created, led, researched, or been a part of history's most successful teams, from World Cup winning coaches to Special Forces leaders and the minds of Google. We're committed to presenting the most diverse array of thought leaders ever assembled. Through the stories and wisdom of our guests, we filter the noise, extract key insights, and deliver clear, actionable steps for you to build industry-leading teams and culture within your organisation. Welcome to Elite Team Talks. Hey everyone, so today we have Dr Ben Rosenblatt on the podcast. He's coached athletes to every Olympic Games since 2008, worked in Olympic gold medal winning teams, and for the last 7 years led England football's physical performance department as part of Gareth Southgate's backroom team. Most recently, Ben founded his own company, 292 Performance, who provide high performance support to high performing individuals. In this episode, we discuss the 5 necessities for a high performing team, how Gareth Southgate's leadership team successfully engineered culture change, his most memorable moments with the England football team, and how, in his opinion, identity eats culture for breakfast. If you enjoy this episode, please like, rate, subscribe, and share with others. Thanks as always for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, we're on, mate. Cool. So today we're joined by Ben Rosenblatt. Hi, Ben. How are we doing?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, mate. Yeah. So to give our viewers and listeners a little understanding around yourself and your experiences, would you mind introducing yourself and giving us your background and the journey that you've been on so far?
Sure. So I'm the founder of a company called 292 Performance. We provide high-performing solutions to high-performing people and teams. So mostly around physical preparation and athletic development of elite athletes. So that's been running for about 6 months now. Prior to that, I led the physical preparation of the England football team for 7 years, and the England football pathway, which I'm sure we'll dive into a little bit. Prior to that, I led the physical preparation of the Great Britain hockey team to the build up to the Rio Olympics. And then prior to that, I led the rehabilitation science of the intensive rehab unit of the British Olympic Association. I've coached athletes to every Olympic Games since 2008, summer and winter, and I've got a PhD in biomechanics. And I guess as a consequence of being involved in high performance sport for so long and having to work with some really unique individuals and in quite, I guess unique, I was going to use the word challenging, but unique situations and circumstances, I became really interested in leadership and how to lead them, how to be led by them, and then also how to, again, be led by and lead teams I'm responsible for as well, which I guess is why we're spending a bit of time chatting today.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really interesting background. Am I right in thinking you also had a spell within professional football with Birmingham City too?
Yeah, that's right. I forgot that. It depends how long you want to go back. Definitely had loads of hair then. I led the physical performance of Birmingham City Football Club when we got promoted to the Premier League. And then I've worked in professional football at other football clubs prior to that as well. I've been consulted across sort of many organisations in sport, in military, and in business as well, more recently around kind of physical performance and human performance. I guess that's some of my background there.
Nice. So some really diverse experience for us to dig into there. I guess if we start at the beginning, what was it that attracted you to being part of these teams in the first place?
Really cool question. So it's probably something around excellence, to be fair. Like I played football and boxed, and I was kind of an athlete. I say kind of, meaning kind of. And I was working as a personal trainer. We were having a conversation earlier about sales, and that's how I learned to sell, because you're having to sell your services very, very frequently. And I guess as a consequence of like being involved in football as well, being an athlete, and being interested in the physical preparation side of things, I kind of thought, well, I don't really want to jog people around the block for the rest of my life. I really want to work at this high level. And I think it was probably something around excellence and just a kind of sense of adventure and being able to help others compete at a really, really high level and make myself better as well, which would attract me to working in these types of organisations.
Nice. So there's a few things there, isn't there? It's around service, I guess, and supporting others as much as it is the excitement of the journey itself.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know, you don't want to sound too much like you're sort of, the humble hero or anything like that, because you do really enjoy it, but there's what I think is there's a great sense of satisfaction of watching people get better, and certainly now I get a real sense of satisfaction recognizing when individuals or teams realize that they need to make a step change or the next step within their performance, whatever domain that might well be. And then because it just reduces all the barriers they have towards commitment and, away they go. And then really you kind of, they're more of a spirit guide with some of your skills and experiences than someone who's actually, traditionally leading, I guess.
Yeah. I actually had a question I was going to ask in a second, but I'd like to touch on something there. You've mentioned the word spirit guides. You're someone with a PhD. You have a really good, deep understanding of the science behind high performance sport. But what is, in your opinion, the most important facet? Is it the science or is it the art? And potentially even if you dig into that, like on a spiritual level, what you're helping create or people to experience?
So I always struggle with this kind of this whole kind of, is it science or is it art, and the fact that they're being placed on a kind of linear like a kind of linear, like it's a scale, like you're either art or science, whatever way I want to put it, because both of those concepts are just different ways of understanding the world. Right. And actually, if you spend my wife's an artist, and if you spend any time with artists, you'll realize that they are completely meticulous in their preparation about producing a piece of work, in the same way which is a scientist is trying to create experiments to do that as well. So I think what we do is more craft orientated. So we've got, without sounding like Liam Neeson, we have a particular set of skills which we're honing and developing and deploying across lots of different situations and circumstances, and then learning how to use all of these skills and broaden them out. So for me, I think as a coach or as a leader, you're more of a craftsperson than a scientist or an artist. And I think, building into your point around where does your energy come from, I think that there has to be an element of, clearly I'm involved in sport, so there's a high amount of physical energy that's required, a higher amount of mental energy that's required to keep focusing. But I think the spiritual energy is the kind of, maybe the connection piece, and why you keep going when it's completely ridiculous to keep going. And I think it allows you to commit. I think there's that brilliant model of intrinsic motivation, isn't there, which is autonomy, mastery, and connectedness. So you're going to keep on going if you're going to commit to something, and you're going to be motivated to do something if, first and foremost, there's a connection between what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve and what you're doing right now. And for me, that's, if there's a spiritual element to it, it's that, the commitment, the connection piece, the mastery, are you getting better? And that's, I guess that's the really important bit from a crafts perspective, like how you help that person make good decisions to help themselves get better. And then the autonomy piece, are they making an active choice and a decision in the work that they're doing to help them make that journey? So again, that's why I think that's probably more craft than science and art. And I completely, maybe I wasn't being too flippant when I said spiritual earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Let's delve into that definitely later in the conversation. And we've had some interesting discussions around behavioural science aspect of being a craftsman and not jamming a square peg in a round hole. But to start with, at the beginning of your journey, I know in another podcast you'd spoken about your time at Birmingham City, and you said you'd been very young in that role. And I personally experienced the same, being thrown at the deep end, leading a department in a professional sports team at the age of 24. And there might be some listeners or viewers who currently feel either overwhelmed, out of their depth, or maybe just lost slightly in their goal of building a world-class team. So if you could talk to yourself now, back then, I guess firstly, what was your biggest takeaway from this experience? And what would your advice be to either your younger self or others in this situation?
So I got fired from Birmingham. So I took the job at Birmingham City when I was 23 as head of sports science and conditioning. And I got fired about a year and a half later because a player got injured in a training session. Now, that wasn't really the reason. You know, the real reason was that I don't think that the organisation itself was in a position to, and the management and et cetera, were in a position where they knew what they wanted from, I guess, my domain. And then I don't think I did a good enough job of understanding the current state of the organisation and the individuals within it. So I was trying to make a change which the organisation or the individuals within it weren't ready to make. And rather than saying, okay, why is that? What are the barriers to change? How do we try and address this? What's actually important to these people? And how can I support that? I just kept on going and just doubled down and went even harder. So I think it was Danny Kerry, who's the head coach of GB Hockey, taught me this. He said, when we're thinking about strategy, like what's most important and what's easiest to change. And I would just go back and do that and have a real look at what's most important to this team, to this group, what's easiest to change. So again, what are the things that I'm trying to introduce heavy strength training into football 20 years ago, or maybe not quite 20 years ago, nearly. You know, they weren't ready for that, but I just kept on pushing and pushing and pushing. So again, I guess if I was to give advice to my younger self or to other people in that organisation, have the real humility to look around you and see what's actually required from you within that group, and then identify what the things that are important to change and how you're going to go about doing that within the organisation. And I suppose recognise they might not be the most important things to you either. And then you've got a decision to make about whether you want to stay in that space or not. And yeah, I think that what I thought, the stuff that was important to me, I thought was most important to everybody, rather than the stuff that's most important to everyone else being the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it really resonates with my experiences in a similar situation. You know, I was only a year older, but we're both very young, and ultimately I had come across from an English way of doing things in rugby, and I got there and I was told if the ball isn't in their hands and they're not doing anything. And it was really hard for me to readjust. And I think also at a young age where maybe I'm more insecure and not necessarily as confident in what I can help support these players or this group with, you don't find it as easy maybe to demonstrate that humility and to ask and to seek. And that's definitely something that's been a huge learning stimulus for me in regards to the behavioural science side of things. And I know you're very interested in that too. We've had some good discussions. Was that one of the precursors for that?
100%. I think I've always been really interested in people and individuals. I think the other thing of that is that the conditions that will, like, so you've taken on a leadership role when you're very, very we've always got leadership roles whenever you're coaching or working with other individuals. You're always a leader, I think, even if you're part of the team and don't have a title. But you got a departmental leadership role there at a very, very young age, and you've got high levels of responsibility there. And it's probably because you were really good. you're doing things really well. You've been recognised for doing things really, really well. So you think the journey that's got you to that point is the reason why you are, and then therefore what you're brought in to deliver. And so I think there's probably, it's quite as a young leader or someone who has been given responsibility young, the biggest challenge you're going to have is this big conflict between, hang about, this is the stuff I know works, but it's not working here. So what do you do? I guess the behavioural science side of things, I had a better way of understanding what that is later on in my career, or I've been able to articulate it. But for sure, the thing that's always stuck with me is, if I was back at Birmingham City, what would I do? How would I do it? And up until very recently, I haven't really thought about that for the last sort of 5 years or so. But it was really a real driver throughout a large point of my career, because it was very, very challenging environment, very challenging circumstances, challenging people. What would I do and how would I do it?
But I guess maybe without us both making those mistakes, we wouldn't have been able to help as many people moving forwards.
Maybe we'd have to ask them whether I've helped.
Yeah, have we helped anyone? We'll see. Awesome.
Do a better job of listening and watching is really important, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Cool. I think it would be nice to move on to a slightly more enjoyable topic, maybe.
I don't mind talking about that at all. Yeah,
that's all good. The time you had with GB women's hockey, and actually the success you experienced during that time, winning Olympic gold. I guess for those that will never be able to win a medal at the Olympics, let alone a gold, could you just describe what that feeling was like?
Well, I mean, I didn't win it; they did. I think that's it. So I still don't know what it's like to win an Olympic gold medal, or compete at the Olympics. But what I recognised for that group in particular is that some of those women had, I think about 8 years before that, had very, very good jobs that they decided to resign from to train full time as an athlete at much lower salary points, etc., like that, and had experienced, if you think about that, 8 to 10 years of experiencing failure and experiencing and having a huge life change to be able to go and train full time as an athlete and try work it all out is, I can't even imagine how difficult and challenging that would be for a person. So to be able to get to the point where they're able to stand on top of the Olympic podium, knowing the decisions they've made and the challenges they've had to face to do that, it must have just been completely overwhelming for many of them, and for all of them. And my role as a as a performance coach, I just felt so happy for them, and just so proud of them. And it was still one of the proudest, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, moment of my career. And again, it's just watching those guys just completely do what they're completely capable of, and just being so happy for them and all the people that have been part of that journey for such a long period of time.
Yeah, and I guess it's really rare in life, isn't it? People normally only see the success, especially if it's something quite significant. To be on the inside, seeing the journey, seeing what those people had to overcome and how they achieved it, it's very rare and very special opportunity.
I think if you hang around sport enough, you're going to lose a lot more than you win. And certainly in terms of titles, and you can have people, some of the greatest athletes cannot win the Olympics, or could not, for various reasons, not achieve the highest levels of success and accolades. So when those moments of success come, then they have to be celebrated and enjoyed with every inch of your life, because they really are very, very rare moments.
Yeah, and it obviously takes an exceptional team to win an Olympic gold medal. What one or two things do you think, as a group, you did exceptionally?
I think that the group spent a lot of time. Now, this worked for this group. Okay, and I've seen it not work for other groups, but I can say for this group, it worked very, very well. they spent a lot of time identifying their vision, that vision, values, and behaviours piece, and really live by it. And we did a job. What we try to do is whatever their, the values and the behaviours, particularly the values piece, we try to orientate into every single aspect of the program. So one of our values is we are winners, and some of the running conditioning sessions, we are, I don't want to forget them all, but we are one team, we are winners. I've forgotten the other one, which is terrible, but we would do running sessions and conditioning sessions and gym sessions, whatever they are, but orientated around being a winner or being one team. So the values, but these aren't running and conditioning sessions. This is a winning session, or this is we are one team session. So I think they did an amazing job of really clearly articulating their values and their behaviours and align that with their vision. And then what we try to do is just infuse that into their everyday environment. They did an exceptional, what they also had was a kind of a really well structured, decentralised leadership process or system, where there was buddy groups where senior athletes were buddied up and paired with more junior athletes, and that was clear. And that the younger athletes had the opportunity to almost be mentored by the older ones. There was a leadership group which had different leaders in for different parts of their preparation process. There was a physical leadership group where we would meet and discuss training plans, the direction of travel, and get their input into it, and how, most importantly, how it was important to communicate, how to communicate the different messages to the team as well, which was really, really important. And we had representative design in our training environment. So a nice story of, so again, Danny Kerry, Karen Brown, Craig Keegan, 3 coaches, did an amazing job of kind of curating that training environment. We did one thing called Thinking Thursdays, which was essentially, it's kind of, games-based conditioning, if you want to call it that. And the coaches were really, really smart about how they would put the rules of the training drills in. So it'd be like 5-a-sides, 6-a-sides, 7-a-sides, 11v11. But the coaches wouldn't coach. They would spend a lot of time beforehand identifying the rules of the game. Things like, so say, for example, we wanted to get better at attacking somebody's back stick. So if you score from attacking somebody's back stick, then it's 2 goals rather than 1 goal. If you're able to tackle that, it counts for a point for your team. So all these rules, I can't remember the word now, but all these rules and kind of conditioned practices were orientated towards the tactical objectives and technical objectives we were trying to get better at. And it got to the point where one of the values we had was, that's it, we always find a way to win. And in the Olympic final, we were down in the 3rd quarter, and we came in for a huddle. The players came into the huddle. Craig Keegan brought everyone in, and everyone was there expecting, like, okay, the Dutch are doing this, we have to do that. The Dutch are doing that, we have to do that. And he sat there and he said, we've got 2 minutes. We're 2-0 down against Holland in the Olympic final. I can't remember the score there, but find a way to win. Now, it's really easy for a coach to go and say that, but that was so much more meaningful because they knew exactly what that meant in terms of process and system. So the girls got together, they went into their small units, they discussed the tactical challenges they were facing and how they were going to overcome it. As a coach, an Olympic coach in a final of Olympic Games, I thought that was the bravest thing that I've ever seen. But he was only able to do it, or it would have been brave or reckless, but it was brave because of the last 3 years they've had building up to that moment where all the squad knew exactly what that meant and the process they had to go engage in to overcome the challenge they were faced. Keys unfortunately passed away very recently. It was really sad.
I'm sorry to hear that. It obviously had a big influence on you.
Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. And the values side of it, you often see, teams, companies espousing X or Y as their values, but you then often hear of these values not being embedded into everyday life within that organization. What do you think are the most important steps to be able to do that effectively?
So what I've seen, or what I believe, is if you look at what we're really talking about, culture here, which is essentially a shared set of behaviours, right? If you look at culture from around the world, why is Spain different to Portugal, to France, to Germany, to the UK, to Scotland, to Wales, to, even within the UK, within England, there's, the northwest to the northeast. Essentially, there's behavioural norms within those small communities which are really unique to those communities. Now, whatever business, organisation, team you're in, you're going to have behavioural norms which are unique to your team, regardless of whether they're productive and aligned with helping you improve, or whether they're destructive. They're just there, because that's what humans do when they bring up community. Your culture is your culture. So one of the ways so with the Great Britain hockey team, they spent a lot of time establishing what those values are first, and then aligning behaviours with that. But I've also seen it go that I've also seen that forced onto teams, and that go terribly wrong as well. And actually, sometimes, the behaviours, the expected behaviours, are aligned with things like selection. Okay, so if you, and it doesn't have to be explicit, it's just implicit. People who around here do stuff like this, and if you don't do stuff like this, then you're basically not coming back. And it isn't written on a wall. It's just part of the leadership group, or the leaders articulating, or be able to articulate within themselves what's expected, and then just living it and doing it. So I think cultural change can come from those two routes. Stuff written on a wall, where's the wall? Or stuff which just happens on a day-to-day basis. And I think the stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis is much more important. What's his name now? Owen Eastwood, and his book Belonging, I think, and the impact that that's had across certainly the world of sport, about teams trying to understand their legacy story, and what got them to that point there, is a real leveler in terms of values. Because I think that communities and people respond a lot better to stories that are being told, rather than words that are written in the wall. Okay, so you can lose energy if you don't feel that something that you're contributing to is going to be lived out in reality. So that's why the stuff that sits on the wall doesn't, because usually it's a leader saying it's that. So what? Even if you've been engaged. Whereas I think your kind of legacy story, or the story that's got everybody to hear, and that being a sense of, this is why we are here in this one space trying to do this, is a much more valuable way of tuning groups into their shared values. And then expected behaviours are just really simple system of reward and neglect or punishment. Has that answered your question? Or
it has, really nicely, yeah. And there's so many takeaways for different organizations, different sectors, whether you're a FTSE 100 company or you're a GB hockey team trying to reach the Olympic finals and win gold. Ultimately, who you are is going to be one of the most important determinants of how you go about doing what you do, and understanding that, whether it's your origin story, like you said, or actually, if you don't have that, what is the story you want to create together? It's hugely valuable.
I feel that, I don't know, I feel that there's that old saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, but I wonder whether identity eats culture. Having a real shared sense of identity of who we are and what we're doing here is the real thing that sets the tone.
Yeah, or maybe even a precursor. Culture impacts your strategy, and your identity impacts your culture, and you can say it's one thing, but ultimately, if those three aren't aligned, you're not going to achieve what you're trying to.
Let's not use big words, right? It's who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
Strategy is what we're gonna do and how we're gonna do it.
Yeah. Awesome. And, leading on from this, we've had quite a few discussions in regards to behavioral science side of things, understanding the people, the organization, the environment, the beliefs, the values of those that you're working with. I'd like to start by discussing the very important matter of the pink inflatable unicorns that were all over the front pages of the newspapers during your time with England when they were, was it the Euros?
That was at the World Cup back.
That was the World Cup. Sorry,
we had other inflatables we used
were available. Yeah,
I think this was, this was originally the brainchild of Bryce Kavanagh, who led the kind of physical performance nutrition, but performance support more generally for the FA. And they did, Bryce is like an amazing thinker and a really broad creative thinker as well. And they did some work on our recovery project, which is called the Other 22 Hours. And essentially the aim was, how can we get the players in the pool for as long as humanly possible? That's the aim. And I've done stuff previously with hockey, where we used to do things like synchronized swimming competitions. So we'd have, the injured girls would have to sit out by the side and be the judges, but we'd have synchronized swimming competitions. We'd have aquafit classes, but all the evidence essentially around the impact of, water immersion on recovery is basically volume. The longer you spend in there, no matter what you're doing, the better the impact is going to be for your recovery. So the challenge is, how do we get these players to spend more time in the pool? So in the Russia World Cup, there was a bit of environmental design where they had to, when there was a kind of training ground, and then we had a bus from the training ground back to the hotel. But they had to get changed in a changing room before they went to their rooms, which was next to a pool. So it was kind of like really easy. So some of the principles of behaviour change or nudge is easy, accessible, social, and timely. So it was really easy to get in the pool. It was accessible because it was literally right there. Seeing the unicorns there was social. So it was, you're going to go in there because it's a social thing to do, and it's timely. We're not trying to do a recovery session at 6 a.m. when people aren't even, we'll say people wake up, but they probably won't be awake then. You're doing it at the time when they probably want to recover anyway. So those were the kind of nudge-based principles that we then deployed across everything we did, really, to try and get better adherence to some of the things which we thought would be really helpful for them. Everything from lucky dip with timers in the ice bath. So we had these egg timers that I'm painting. They were all the same color. So some of them lasted for 30 seconds, some lasted 10 minutes. Lucky dip, see how long you go in there for. If you're in for 30 seconds, most of them will stay for the full 10 minutes, right? Things like we stole their trainers. And we put them in the swimming pool area so that they had to essentially get there to get their trainers. Things like water balloon fights, which actually had a kind of counter. Yeah, it was bad behaviour, bad kind of nudging, really, because what we found was the guys that were in the water had all the water balloons. There were 6 of them in the water, and they were just pelting everyone else who was staying out of the water. So,
you included, or were you safe behind someone?
But 6 players had a great recovery session, and 45 players, 18 players were dipping and diving and trying to not get wet. So it's everything from there to like how we gamify our training environment. So things like trying to make when we're trying to get them to essentially deliver more intensity within their S&C environment, the strength and conditioning environment. How do we help them engage with the work they're doing? Well, we make a competition and make sure there's a competition where everyone has to contribute to. If one person isn't in the competition, they let the whole team down. And then there's a reward for it, like a stupid boxing belt, or there's a time on it, or just things like that, to just encourage them to interact with the environment in the way that you want to.
No, it's fascinating, and it sort of leads into the next question, which is about a lot of companies, I think, realizing that the traditional autocratic, maybe hierarchical approach isn't necessarily the best, especially for the generations coming through. If you're trying to create an environment where people achieve their full potential, fun, obviously, based off the discussions we've had and what you've just described there, was a key part of creating a winning environment with the England football team. But if we zoom out, in general, what do you think are 2 or 3 crucial components to get the best out of your team from an environment perspective?
I think clarity is really, really important. Being completely clear on what your role is within a team. Mate, I'm going to see if I can keep it all in C's, right? Clarity, completely clear on what your role is within a team, and what other people's roles are, and what you're there to do. Consistency, does that kind of stay the same, and is there a theme to that, so that it's not one thing one day, one thing the next? You're clear and consistent, because I think that breeds confidence, where you gain personal value from this thing, how you're contributing to a team. Yeah, and I suppose that's also aligned with your competence as well. And I think the final one is contribution as well. Have you had the opportunity to contribute to the direction of travel? A lot of people don't want to, actually. Sometimes you find a lot of people just tell me what to do. So that's why I think clarity is really important. But the opportunity to contribute is also really, really important as well. So I think in terms of winning teams, clarity on role, is it aligned with what you're competent at? Are you able to have the opportunity to deliver that consistency, and as a team grow confident from it? And then again, do you have the opportunity to contribute as well?
The 5 C's, you heard it here first. Trademarked. B. Rosenblatt 2023.
I mean, the problem is, as soon as you say 1 or 2 things beginning with C, everything else has to begin with a C.
Mate, it rolled off the tongue.
What do you think we're missing?
It's interesting. A lot of what you've described there is built into a framework that I use with companies and ambitious teams, which, funnily enough, is the 5 Ps. So there's something here.
Get out.
But not C's. There's no copyright infringement. But yeah, I think, to be honest, different parts of those 5 Ps are weighted differently, and the 5 Cs that you've just described there are some of the, in my opinion, most important pillars for a high performing team. Like you've said, clarity, so often spoken about, so often missing.
Yeah.
And if you have that, and ultimately you understand, like we spoke about earlier, who you are, how you want to do it, what you want to do, as long as then you have people who, if we steal it from our good friend James King, in your sweet spot where your interests, values and skills intersect, then ultimately, as long as you've got people in those roles with that clarity, ultimately it reminds me of a bit of a phrase that they used when I worked in special forces, which is, this could be applied to a man or woman, but in their case, it was find the right man and let him get on with the job. And I mean, if our job was that easy, it would be fantastic. But ultimately, there's a lot of truth to that, and definitely,
right?
Yeah. And what you've said there with those 5 C's, I think probably covers 90% of most challenges to create a sustainable world-class team.
I think there's each individual within a team, and each team itself, it's almost like an amplifier, right? Some team are going to require more, or individuals are going to require more clarity. If this is a new task, so I'm doing a bit of work for an organisation, and it's new to them, it's new to me. They've brought me in to come and do this one particular thing. I'm an experienced coach. I've got leadership experience. And what I'm doing there is what I'm saying is, I don't want to contribute. I don't want to contribute to the direction of travel here. Give me complete clarity on what you're expecting for me to do here, and give me clarity on what you want the outcome to be. and then I can have confidence that I'm going to go away and do it. And also, have I got the competence to actually go and do that? So what help do I need? Or so versus other situations where I'm being brought into an organisation to support something else. It's like, okay, I don't need the clarity on what I'm here to do or what the situation is. The most important thing is that I've got the opportunity to contribute to the direction of travel here based on what I'm observing and what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing as well and what I'm feeling. So I think I was thinking initially that a more junior or underdeveloped team might require more clarity rather than contribution, but actually I think as a leader you've got to recognize where your balance is personally and what balance you require from that team as well.
Yeah, that ability to sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, mate. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say that ability to understand the people, the environment, and the climate is, one of the most important things, isn't it? That EQ element.
Yeah, 100%. I think so.
So you've been part of one of the most successful periods in the history of English football. I mean, you reached the semi-finals of the 2018 World Cup and you made it to the 2020 Euro finals. And ultimately, there's going to be a hell of a lot to have remembered fondly and enjoyed and experienced. But what was your best moment of the last 8 years?
Oh, yeah, actually, two of them. Beating Germany at Wembley. Beating Germany at Wembley was pretty cool for the kind of last 16 of the Euros, and then after we won the semis against Denmark, being able to look into the crowd and see my brother and my wife celebrating as everyone's singing "Sweet Caroline" was pretty. They're really, really strong, kind of strong memories. I think the thing that those are the ones that really stand up with a load of emotion, but also when I think even further about it, we were trying to change the physical training culture of the team and the organisation and ultimately the game. So some of the stuff that really stands out is when players had come through an S&C session before training, and they, you're looking around and everyone's doing something individual which is aligned to what's important to them. They're attacking it with real intensity. They're getting better and they're getting confident from the work they're doing. And I remember thinking a few times, like, almost nearly being in tears, like, wow, fuck me, like, we're actually, this is happening, we're doing it. And that was kind of, there's not as many people celebrating with you at that particular point in time. It's usually just you. But I guess those are the moments that are probably more stand out as stand out really for me.
Equally pinch me, isn't it? I mean, I can attest to that, having worked in some environments where ultimately success was dependent on culture change and that culture being deeply rooted and ingrained. And you go through some periods where you feel like you're banging your head against the wall. Are we actually making a difference? And then every now and again you get that one example, that one beacon of optimism, because you see someone who has always taken a different route decide to take the new route. And yeah, I totally get that as a coach, and I'm sure as a lot of people listening in corporate space will attest to, you don't always have those wins every day. You can have long periods, can't you, where that the work you're doing is of a high quality, let's say, and that ultimately you've experienced success with it in the past, but you're waiting to see whether those artifacts of that work is going to come to fruition. And when you do, it's very, very sweet.
I was just coaching this morning, and I was reminding an athlete of that learning sweet spot, which is essentially the things that really, when you really are hungry and keep pushing, it's not because you get success every single time. And actually, if you look at skill acquisition and motor learning research, I can't remember what the exact percentage is, but I don't want to say 80-20 because that's so overdone. Maybe 79-21%. But the balance of failure to success is far more towards failure than success. And when you're trying to learn a new skill or learn a new task and to be able to execute it under the most challenging of situations and circumstances, you only need to see a little glimmer of success every now and again to keep you hungry and keep you pushing on. And that's the thing which will allow you to get your 10,000 hours, or like just those repetitions, those deep repetitions again and again and again. And and when you make that change, when the change ultimately happens, again, similar to motor learning, if you're riding a bike, once you've learned how to ride a bike, you can't unlearn how to ride a bike. You know how to do it. So the change is wobble, wobble, wobble. Oh, I can do it. I can do it. You're off, right? The next thing to do is, again, within learning, coaching, I think maybe around leadership as well, is once that change has happened, it's like, okay, what do we do with this now to keep it stretching? Because if you don't, it will just degrade. If you spend long enough not riding a bike, once you've learned to do it, next time you jump on, you've forgotten how to do it.
Yeah, and piggybacking nicely off of that and change, you've worked in the leadership group with the England football team since probably around the same time as Gareth Southgate came in. Ultimately, at that point, from my understanding, the team were underperforming relative to their potential. For listeners or viewers responsible for turning their team's performance around, and obviously I'm not expecting you to say it was that person or that person, but what one or two things would you suggest people do first when stepping into an environment where a team are underperforming?
I think that my experiences, not just within football but across my career, has been that do a real thorough situational analysis, frankly, and trying to do it from a very, very dispassionate and unemotional perspective, and then also recognizing that it's probably not just you who are going to have the answers to that as well. So getting lots of eyes on the situation from a variety of different perspectives, mostly of who you would probably naturally disagree with, I think is really important, because it allows you to get rid of any biases that you have and to be very, very dispassionate about what the steps that you're going to take to help that team progress and evolve. I think that, talking about the England football team, I had a minor role in it from a kind of, my role was to change the physical training culture and help prepare them physically for the demands of the tournament and the demands of the demands of the tournament and the demands of the game. But I think, honestly, there was a huge piece of work going on with a lot of very, very significant and senior leaders within the organisation over a very, very long period of time, which the team is starting to reap the benefits from right now. People of whom I wouldn't even be able to mention or know because they were before my time. So I think it's really important. I think that that's really, really important to recognise the very fact that football, which had been traditionally quite insular with its recruitment, decided to recruit someone who had limited football experience, but experience with high variety of Olympic and elite sport, in to work with the national senior team and lead the physical preparation, probably tells you quite a lot about the conditions, I guess, the leadership conditions that were in place to be able to invite change. There was when I stepped in, there was a big moment around things need to change, we want to change, and probably that in itself is a big enough rock that you need to shift, just to put I guess the point where everybody in there recognize that something needs to shift, and then it's just working it. But you can't change things if people don't recognize that something needs to shift, right?
Yeah, it's the good old ADKAR model, isn't it? The first two are awareness and desire. And as long as people have the awareness of the need for change, not just that the change is happening, and then the actual desire to be a part of that change and for the change to occur. You then have knowledge, ability, all these other areas. But as you've said, if you don't have that in the first place, you're spending 10x trying to reinforce change as opposed to X setting the scene for change and ensuring the conditions are right.
I think you mentioned that as well. In some of our previous conversations, the condition for change is, the landscape or the environment for change is so critical. My PhD was in biomechanics and motor learning, and I wonder if there's some nice parallels there. We've got to study dynamic systems theory, which is essentially the outcome of any action is going to be dictated by the demands of the environment, the task itself, and the kind of the organism, and in which case, in the mechanical terms, like the biomechanical terms, the athlete. But I wonder if you think about that slightly more broadly, the outcome from any the outcome of any actions that a team are going to create are going to be dependent on the task, and I suppose their competence within that, the group that are making up that team, and the environment in which they sit as well. And the kind of more organisational structure with which when they sit as well. So you can't ignore the conditions for change and them being present as well.
Yeah, oh, that's great. And you've helped be as you've very humbly said, a small part, a cog in leading, one of the most successful periods in the history of English football. As well as obviously the awareness, desire, etc., that you've spoken about for change being necessary, what one or two things have you done differently to previous England teams based off your understanding?
I think that, again, I'm going to be careful about what I say, because what I don't want to come across is that anything going on before I was there over the last 100 years of England football has been anything other than excellent, because it has been. I can say the things that I felt were important were, I think when we stepped in, we recognised that fundamentally the players didn't have the physical capability to be able to train with the intensity that we required on a day-to-day basis, and then in order to be able to compete at that level as well. So we went through a process of trying to understand that through physical profiling, through testing the players, which was really controversial within many of the Premier League clubs didn't think it was our role or our right to do that at that particular point in time. But we thought that was really important to gauge an understanding of the physical characteristics of the squad, to help us gauge whether it was a physical capacity problem or there was a different side to the problem. And we uncovered that there was probably some issues around how the players were preparing physically, but on England camps, and some issues around and some issues that they had around their kind of longer term physical development as well. So that was kind of the first thing we did. And then I think I guess from a business perspective, it's kind of assess, but have the courage to do assessments that are not going to be well received. There was a hell of a lot of friction around that, internally and externally. I think the next thing was we tried to be very, very, very deliberate about understanding the ecosystem and the environment, and then the players themselves. So in terms of understanding the ecosystem, we did a really thorough job of looking at every single football club and their physical training model, how they prepared physically, what their values were, what their beliefs were, what their behaviours were around physical training. Try and understand the conditions, or the conditions that each player was kind of preparing in. And that was the most important thing we did, to understand what they were doing, because then if there's a change that needs to take place, you know which dial you can turn. If this club doesn't believe in strength training, then by saying to them this player needs to put another 50 kilos on their back when they're squatting, it's going to be ridiculous, because they're not squatting anyway. But if they take, more of a tissue conditioning based model, for example, then we can talk about it through this lens. So understanding those conditions, and also understanding the friction points that existed between the national team and the clubs. So it felt like they were making a really positive contribution the national team as well, was I think was really important. So it's building a stronger sense of connection by understanding their world and inviting them to contribute to and understand ours a little bit. I think also the things that were important to me was understanding the player. So we did some work with the nudge unit of the government, which is now the Behavioural Insights team, which is an independent organisation. And they taught us a lot about combi modelling. It was actually Mike Naylor, who is the head of performance nutrition for UK Sport Institute and leads performance nutrition for the England senior team, brought that to our attention. And essentially what that is that athletes are only able to change their behaviours as a consequence of their capability, their opportunity, their motivation to change. So capability is their knowledge, skills, experience. Opportunity is the environmental conditions, this stuff here. Motivation is the motivational psychology, which we spoke about earlier, which is autonomy, mastery, and connectedness. So what we try to do, we called it durability mapping, from the Russia World Cup to the Euros, was we tried to identify in an interdisciplinary way what were the things that were going to stop each player starting. So what were the physical things which were going to stop the players getting to the start line of the Euros, and then understanding that, prioritizing that, what are the most we have across, again, whether nutritionally, physically, psychologically, whatever it is. So trying to identify what that's one or two single thing was, what's most important, what's easiest to change, and then identifying whether it was a capability issue, their knowledge, skills, and experience, an opportunity issue, the conditions within their club, or a motivational issue. And then by being very, very deliberate about that, we're able to identify one or two things for each player and the one or two key barriers for each player, which meant that we're now going from trying to solve this big, huge problem about cultural change to trying to solve the one very, very specific problem for each individual. And guess what? When you talk to a player about, and you get their contribution to that as well, what's your weapons, what's your work on, so that type of stuff. And guess what? When you try to tackle it in a much, much smaller, more narrow field, you have a lot greater success. And so by the time we were getting towards the World Cup, we were then able to start talking to players about giving them real clarity about, this is what the next 3 or 4 months looks like for you. This is the demands of the World Cup. Where do you see your gaps? And because there was a real strong sense of trust and connection as a consequence of going through that journey up until that point.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I remember when you introduced me a while back to the combi model of behaviour change, and ever since then it's been integrated into a lot of what I've done, and has helped, like you say, just really strip away the nice to haves and understand what is the biggest obstacle here, and to be able to almost transport yourself empathetically into the individual or the group's perspective. And it does just make the whole behavior change process a hell of a lot simpler.
Being very, very, I think we talk about culture. Yeah, it can just be a bit too ethereal and abstract, this kind of bit like thing that you're trying to change versus actually, or trying to make the players better physically capable of doing this. It's like it's kind of quite abstract, really. Whereas if you can make it really, really discreet for each individual, it's a large setup task to do, but once you nail it for each individual, their rate of learning and acceleration of their kind of rate of learning and their rate of connection to the program, the plan, goes through the roof. And very, very quickly, you then have these conditions where you can take the team or the squad or the individual wherever you really want to.
Yeah, I think it links back nicely to what we were discussing earlier about you either spend X amount of time understanding the climate and the need for change and the barriers, or you spend 10x just trying to reinforce it and bang your head against the wall. And it sounds like as an organization, you guys really took a step back and viewed it with very diverse perspectives and invested a lot into that process of understanding what are the key things we need to go 100% dialed in on, and what are the things that are ultimately not stopping us from getting to where we want to be.
Yeah, like you say, like, what's the difference between the kind of, yeah, I guess you use the words nice to have and needs to have, but like really leveling down on what the most important things are for those individuals or for the group, and really just being ruthless in your pursuit of that, rather than, and I guess, reflecting back on my Birmingham City experiences, even if they didn't align with my values, my skills, things which I knew worked, then still recognizing that that's still the most important thing for that person there. So I better get to learn about that.
Yeah. And it links nicely into the next question, which is largely from an outsider's perspective. It seems like there's been a really clear emphasis on team connection, and with that unifying purpose of inspiring and uniting the nation that's been, quoted in the media. You've spoken before about how you threaded values into your everyday work, but how did you thread this larger than life purpose into your everyday work? And in your opinion, how could teams and organizations do the same?
Yeah, I think that it makes me think of that kind of Aristotle's logic of, I assume we're all here to do this, I assume we're all here to do that, and as a consequence it means we've done this and we need to agree to that, so let's go. So there's some, do you see what I mean? So I think it can be quite easy without it becoming quite abstract. But I think that I'm kind of torn here, because I feel that, yeah, that piece around your aspiration and what you're trying to do should be really strongly connected to your identity and who you are, right? But it shouldn't be, there's definitely shouldn't be a disconnect there. Therefore, that should almost be something which lives with you every single day, and it's just a part of who you are, because it's part of who we are. So you wouldn't set an ambition for a team of inspiring the nation unless it was really part of the legacy story or the kind of origin story of that group anyway, and making sure that everyone understood that origin story. If it would be weird for a team that I would be part of to be something like, I don't know, sell more bananas. I don't know, just some sort of weird kind of. Do you see what I mean? So I think that it should be so strong. I guess what I'm saying is, and you probably have to edit all a load of that crap I just waffled on about there out. There should be a really strong sense of connection between the ambition and the vision and the identity, who you are, and then what you're trying to achieve. Because if that bit's not connected, then there's no chance of it living on a day-to-day basis. It's basically bollocks, right? And then I think it's just getting to work on a day-to-day basis on that craftsmanship of making sure you're just becoming excellent at the things that are your role and the things that make you part of that team. That clarity, consistency, and connection piece, and competence piece. Sorry. So I think they kind of live separately, but they infuse. If there's a disconnect between identity and vision, then it can't live every single day. And if you have clarity within the role, opportunity to contribute, those C's we spoke about earlier, then I think they should be automatically connected to the vision, because it's connected to who you are anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having alignment between who we are, what we want to do, how we want to do it is going to be the 80-20, I guess, of living that larger than life purpose.
Yeah, I think so, because every single day when you're in a team like that, if you're thinking every single day, oh, how am I going to win the World Cup? This is, it's kind of do or die about whether this helps you win the World Cup or this helps you win the Olympics or not. Then the amount of pressure you're putting on every single action and stuff is like, it's kind of ridiculous. But if winning the Olympics or winning the World Cup is part of your personal identity and the things that are that your team identity, or behaving in a certain way is part of your identity, then there's a much easier connect between who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That makes total sense. And with any highly ambitious team, like England team, like GB Hockey, there's always going to be periods of disappointment. I mean, you mentioned the ratio of failure to success from a wins-loss perspective. What were these experiences like for you in hindsight? What advice would you give yourself? And is there anything you would do differently?
I think the ability to detach yourself from the outcome is really important, personally, and actually more about what you were trying to achieve. I know in Olympic sport world at the moment they're doing things like called a pre-mortem. So before the event, what they're expecting to happen, and then what are the things that could go wrong, and how you're going to kind of overcome that if they do. For me, as long as I've got real clarity going into a situation about what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, and what our kind of critical measures of success are, and being able to reflect on them, then for me that's more important than, it's not more important than the result at all, actually, but that's the important thing for me to reflect on, and detach myself from. Because at the end of the day, if those signals are all trending up but the results are trending down, then I've got to change the signals, and I've got to change the things that I'm responsible for, because it's not helping the performance or not helping the result. So the way I navigate disappointment is essentially making sure I've got complete clarity about what I'm there to do, how I'm there to do it, and what signs and signals I'm using to measure whether that's contributing or not. And I probably get more if we've had a camp where we've won a couple of games, but there's been a complete disaster in terms of what I've tried to achieve, how I've tried to do it, and my signs and signals, then that's going to eat at me a lot more than the overall result. Maybe that's because I'm not playing the game, or I'm not the head coach or the manager, right? But those are the things I'm responsible for, to helping the team win. And at the end of the day, I know if my personal losses keep stacking up, then that's not going to help the team eventually.
Yeah. So it's ultimately, like you said, that maybe to a certain extent subjective detachment from the outcome, so that you can view it with a more objective lens. And that's obviously a hugely beneficial thing, to be able to strip away bias and to be able to understand the root cause of maybe why, like you've spoken about, the actions didn't align with the outcome that you desired. What would, sort of evolving off of that, what would your take be for people who are so invested in achieving X, whether it's in the sports arena or whether it's in the stock market or whether it's just a problem which they want to solve for humanity, and the ability to detach yourself from the outcome in relation to identity? Because obviously often it's people that invest a huge amount of time, a huge amount of their life into the pursuit of these things, but how sustainable is it to go all in versus being able to have other facets to your identity that allow you to detach?
So I think that in order to be, if you look at some of the greats and some of the best people that I've worked with, best athletes I've worked with, who have serial Olympic gold medalists, most successful footballers in the world, the thing that they've all got in common is that they're master craftsmen. They're completely ruthless competitors. They've got the capacity to be able to divert all their energy and resources and attention to that one thing at that one particular point in time. They're ruthless in the pursuit of that. And but they're complete master craftsmen, that they are, meticulous about their individual techniques and, everything like that. So they're obsessed with kind of their craft. And as a consequence, because they're so good, that there's then such a strong connection between their craft and the outcome. So I also think but they've also got the best people I've worked with have also got the ability to switch their resources from all in on this one thing at that particular point in time to I don't think it's all out. It's just all in onto the next particular thing at that point in time. So if they're with their family, they're with their family. They're not in the game. You know, if they're in the game or if they're training or they are training, they're not anywhere else. So I think, and I've unfortunately worked with several athletes that have had severe mental health problems and actually, you know, suicide attempts post sport when their identity is completely wrapped up in what they're delivering in their sports arena. So I don't think it's the ability to switch off is really, really important, but I think it's the ability to switch on to something else is really, really important. So, and then the best people that I've worked with are the ones who can focus. We're doing a podcast now, and I'm focusing on you and what you're saying and what you're listening to. You know, when this is done, I won't be thinking about it. We'll be focusing on whatever's going on next. I will be, because I'm not a superb performer, right? But I'll be reflecting on that and going, why did I swear or something like that? But do you see what I mean? So, I think balance isn't the aspiration. I don't think ego detachment is the aspiration, but the ability to focus on whatever's in front of you with complete ruthlessness and clarity and go deep on that is really important. And whether that is being a master craftsman in your craft, I don't know, I've never worked with a trader, but I guess it's, you know, someone trying to make a load of money on the stock market, but when the stock market shuts down, they have to be able to divert their resources and attention to something else, because otherwise they will wear themselves out. That's just kind of your physiology, right?
100%. Yeah, that ability to be present, you know, and I guess that's a skill. You know, I'm a big fan of meditation and have used it for a while now. And one of the things I've just, again, speaking of personal experience, found is that ability to be present is a skill, and I have to continually practice that. And it doesn't mean it's always necessarily on my mind, but when I've maybe been a little less consistent with just daily meditation, I start to notice that my thoughts are drifting, that I'm not engaging as much in whatever I'm doing now. And obviously that can apply to as many things as possible. It can apply to when you're at your work, but it can also apply, as you said, to when you're with your family.
Yeah, I think that's interesting you say. I notice that I meditate daily as well, and when I notice that I haven't, when I come back to meditation, I just recognise how cluttered my mind is, how busy it is, and that makes me think, how cluttered is my mind when I'm meant to be focusing on the task in hand? And I don't think meditation is for everyone, right? I completely understand it's not for everyone, but just having, and some people listen, in the same way that some people don't have to lift a weight or you know, run to get strong or fit. They're just some freaks out there. It's probably the same mentally as well, right? Not everyone needs to do these different things, but as long as but I guess it's recognizing the balance of your skill set. And if there is something there which involves deep focus, and then you're struggling to be able to keep on putting deep focus into the tasks that are really important to you, there's probably something about you're probably not focusing enough on the tasks that are in front of you, because you're not focusing enough on the tasks that are in front of you when you're away from the important one, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. It's sort of discussions we've had in regards to, as you said, developing like physically robust players. You know, the concept of robustness, or even if I quote, you know, Nassim Taleb's book Anti-Fragile, where he talks about things that not only gain from chaos and disorder, but they need it to thrive in a highly like chaotic, unpredictable world. You know, as an outsider, again, I noticed that the team appeared to be just as strongly connected, or even stronger, after difficult experiences. It sounds like you also, as a team, were really reframing adversity and failure as an opportunity rather than a threat. You know, you saw those as things that you needed, not just, we've lost, but like, this is a natural part of where we want to get to. What can we learn from it? Like you've spoken about. Was that something that was spoken about, or do you think that was something that more organically happened just due to the environment that you'd created?
Yeah, there's definitely, again, involved in, we've known in sport for a while about the challenge threat axis, right? And if you're able to pursue the kind of, excuse me,
bless you.
We've known for a while about that challenge threat axis, and if you faced with the same situation, if you're able to perceive it as a challenge or able to perceive it as a threat, it's going to change how you perceive a situation, and then how what your physiological and psychological response to that is. And certainly that's something the team went into a lot of detail in around penalties. And part of that comes from, we had that experience with hockey as well, which is, we won the Olympics and the European Championships on a shootout. And the part of that comes from recognizing, looking around corners, sniffing danger, knowing it's coming, having a clear plan around what we're going to do around it, that everyone's got the opportunity to contribute to. And then, that's the whole kind of find a way to win thing as well. We have faced these, we don't know the specific situation, but we've faced challenging ones. And this is beforehand, this is the process we kind of go through. And part of that is that perceiving things as a challenge rather than a threat. So in this particular situation, we're going to perceive it as a challenge.
Yeah, and as you said, your whole psychology and physiology changes. You get that dopamine drive, don't you, rather than that cortisol release.
I think that's what the best coaches I've worked with have done, is they teach athletes how to respond to stressful situations. So whether it's the model of recognize, adapt, overcome, or, eyes up, win the next action, whatever that thing is, that is essentially, and I think that's what great leaders do, or great coaches, do, is they teach athletes, and great athletes teach each other athletes how to respond to those situations. So your training, in my mind, shouldn't then represent every single potential disaster scenario that could come up, because that's impossible. But what your training should do is teach your team and your individuals how to respond to really challenging situations, which could be perceived as high threats.
And is that something that you screened for when you were looking at which players you wanted to be a part of your team? Or was it something that you looked to develop once they were within? I only ask because, my 5 years that I've just had working with special forces, a huge part of the selection process there is layering on the physical and psychological stress to peel back the layers that we all portray of who we want people to think we are and who we even think we are ourselves. And you get down to the real core of each person, and you understand these things like whether they're able to reframe, something that might be seen to some as a threat as an opportunity, or whether they're able to gain from adversity and thrive as opposed to become overwhelmed. And I'd be interested to know whether that factors into recruitment, or whether you by and large look to create that once you have that team formed.
I think that the experiences that I have around that are that there's essentially, it's a meritocracy in some regards, right? Because by the time you get to those teams, you have to have demonstrated attributes like that in very, very stressful and demanding circumstances anyway. Now, I think the thing is, though, you're never really going to know until you get to that moment. And even then, that moment might not define. I always think about it if someone goes like, if someone breaks into my house, I'll get my baseball bat and I'll knock around it. And yeah, you might do that one night, but then one night you might be half asleep and dozing and scared, and you might not. So like each situation is very, very kinetic and different. So I think that there's a natural screening process that takes place within sport. And then I think the environments that you set, that you have available to you, either through competition or through training, give you the opportunity to further expose and then understand. But I think fundamentally, in the highest pressures of situations or games, that coaches, and I'm not a coach, so I can't speak to this experience, but what I've observed across sport is that coaches are constantly making the balance of the team and, the team and what the balance is. Like, if you've got everyone who's a complete warrior and is able to handle these massive situations, but have got zero tactical skills or athleticism, there's always just going to be a balance across the team. And I think that's what they're constantly, that's why they get paid the big bucks, right? Because they're constantly having to make a decision around risk and consequence. And I think from that, it seems to me that there is never, ever a situation which is without risk or threat or consequence with any decision that you're going to make. But it's about knowing what those risks are and being comfortable to live with them, right? Ultimately that's the challenge of leadership and selection, I guess. What's really interesting is probably the individual sports that I work with as well, and the individual athletes that you work with, because they can't lean on other people in those situations or circumstances, and it's only up to them. And that's where you have to really help those athletes grow and develop some of those attributes and skills. And at the end of the day, I do believe within reason, because we're not talking about Joe Blogs, person off the street. We're talking about some pretty extreme characters and individuals anyway. It's just about finding a way of accessing that for them and helping them find their way of, performing under these extreme conditions.
Oh, very interesting. I'd love to finish, if you're happy, with a little word association.
Sure.
He says, not sure if I should agree to this.
Yeah, I don't know what you...
It's all PG, don't you worry, nothing to worry about.
It could not be, let's
go. So we'll kick it off. The first is culture.
Identity.
Values.
Behaviours.
Purpose.
Ambition.
England.
Winning.
Pressure.
Love it.
Failure.
Love it.
Football. You can't have the same two, but we'll let you off. We'll let you off.
Football. I wanted to say love it, but that's rubbish, isn't it? I can't say it. Oh. Challenge.
Family.
Love. Big love.
Love.
Big love. I said love it last time. Okay, family and purpose.
No, I put love for 9 as well, but you've just said love.
You just said love.
Family. Yeah, there you go. And the last one, legacy.
Overrated.
Nice. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for making me sweat.
I'm sure you'll return the favour.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah.
No, that was brilliant. And there's so much, I think, from that people will find, if not insightful, but also really practical. A lot of the stuff you spoke about, that you've integrated, even just some of the ways of like framing behaviour change, and it's obviously really fun for people to hear your stories and your journey, but at the same time I think it's important for people to be able to actually take something away from it too, and you've absolutely nailed that, mate, so I really appreciate it.
Hopefully. I don't profess to be an expert in any of these areas, and I also tried not to speak other people's experiences, but only spoke my own. So hopefully that's useful in some way.
Yeah, you've nailed it, mate. It's fantastic. Hi again, everyone. So thank you for listening. I hope you really enjoyed my discussion with Ben today. I found it really insightful, and what I'd like to do first is to summarise what we spoke about, and then we'll move on to the 3 key takeaways for this episode. So let's start by discussing purpose. And Ben basically said that your purpose is your why, for why you keep going when it's completely ridiculous too. And for Ben, that was about service and supporting others as much as it is about the excitement of the journey itself. He explains self-determination theory, which really explains 3 crucial components that deeply motivate us as humans. These are autonomy, connection, and mastery. And if you really want to motivate your people, then you need to be leveraging all three of these. In regards to developing a clear purpose, the GB women's team that he worked in and won an Olympic gold medal with spent a lot of time defining and incorporating their vision, mission and values into every single aspect of their work and language. But Ben describes how culture is actually far less about what's written on the wall and far more about what's lived every day. It's a shared set of behaviours, or otherwise known as your behavioural norms. Who you are is actually one of the most important determinants of this, and whilst culture may eat strategy for breakfast, Ben believes that identity eats culture. We reference Owen Eastwood's book Belonging, which provides a great approach to understanding your origin story and identity, or quite simply, who you are as an organisation or team. Most importantly, you wouldn't set the ambition to inspire a nation like the England football team did if it wasn't aligned with your origin story. There needs to be a really strong connection between your origin story and then your vision, mission and values, aka who you are, what you want to do and how you want to do it. And in Ben's words, if this isn't there, then it's bollocks. People will see it as a marketing project, and in the words of Socrates, you really need to know thyself. So, question to ask yourselves, what is the story your people tell themselves or others about who they are and who your company are? That ultimately will be one of the biggest factors in dictating your mission, vision, values, and culture. The next thing that we spoke about was hiring the right people. And Ben spoke about how football had originally been quite insular in regards to recruitment, and it showed their leadership's commitment to inviting change and bringing diverse people, skills, and experience by actually recruiting Ben in the first place, who had a high variety of experience with Olympic and elite sports to bring some fresh perspectives and insights. He actually related this back to something called dynamic systems theory, which he studied when he was studying biomechanics for his PhD. And basically, it's a fancy name for just saying the outcome of any action is dictated by the environment, the task, and the actual organism, so humans or teams. So he'd previously looked at this from a biomechanical perspective, but believed it applied just as much to the team. And you could relate the environment to the organisational structure as an example, the task to winning games in his perspective, or winning market share in yours, and the organism is to the team and the individuals itself. So basically, the outcome is the combination of the environment, for example, your organisational structure, the task, trying to win X or Y, and the organism, the team and individuals within it. In regards to driving cultural change, Ben spoke about how GB Hockey had a well-structured, decentralised leadership system, which was actually quite similar to what Scott Draw had mentioned on a previous podcast as being necessary to empower people and develop leaders across the whole organisation. However, some people don't work in an empowering environment like this, and so the advice he'd give to people who at times feel frustrated, overwhelmed or stuck at work due to bureaucracy is first to look at what's most important and what's easiest to change, maybe ranking these on a scale of 1 to 10 each or plotting them on a diagram. The next thing is to have the humility and empathy to understand the situation and others' perspectives before navigating it. When you can come at a conversation from the individual's perspective that you're having that conversation with, demonstrating that you've taken the time to understand their point of view and why they might hold a certain opinion, it's going to result in a far higher likelihood of that conversation being productive and successful. Ben worked in the leadership group since Gareth Southgate came in and the team were underperforming. If you are moving into an environment or a team where maybe you aren't realising your full potential, his advice is firstly to do a thorough situational analysis, most importantly from a dispassionate, unemotional and objective perspective, recognising that it's not just you that's going to have answers on it. So, what should you do? You should seek people with different views and perspectives to also have a look, especially those who challenge you, however uncomfortable that may be. And this is going to reduce bias and potentially reframe culture problems for innovative solutions. He said that he can't speak on behalf of previous England teams, but he personally felt the players didn't have the physical capacity to train with the intensity they needed on a day-to-day basis to be the best. This was obviously controversial, and Premier League clubs felt it wasn't England football's place to screen players on this, but they knew it was crucial to provide them with the necessary insights surrounding the players' physical preparation and their habits. So, what can we take from this? The important thing is to assess and have the courage to do assessments which aren't always going to be well received. There may be internal or external friction to them, but if you can try and empathise with others who may resist them and explain how it would benefit them from their perspective, it's going to increase the likelihood of them jumping on board, or at least not putting up so much resistance. Alongside physically screening the players, they try to understand the actual ecosystem of football itself, and this applies just as much to the culture and the market and the company that you're working in. The culture values beliefs and behaviours surrounding physical conditioning at each Premiership or foreign club their players are at were understood and studied. They also needed to understand friction points, and one of these was to develop a stronger sense of connection between England and the clubs themselves. So they tried to understand the club's world better and their view, and invite the clubs also to understand England's. Throughout this process, they actually worked with the government's nudge unit, which is now the Behaviour Insights team, to understand the players and how to influence their behaviour with the help of Mike Naylor, the nutritionist. They learnt that players will only change their behaviours if either their capability, opportunity or motivation for that behaviour improves. And this is what's known as the COMB model, COMB. Capability refers to an individual's physical and psychological skills or capacity to perform that behaviour. Opportunity refers to their social and logistical opportunity to perform it. For example, what's their club culture? Do they have time to perform that behaviour? Do they have equipment available? And then motivation refers to their level of autonomy, mastery and connectedness for that behaviour. As I said, this forms a combi model of behaviour change, which I've utilised before actually with pretty good success in the environments I've worked in, and understanding which of these to leverage is really crucial. So what did they do? Well, from the Russia World Cup to the Euros, they tried to identify what the things were in each of the above areas that will stop players getting to the start line and being able to perform at their best. Was it their capability? Maybe their opportunity, or maybe their motivation, which would be the greatest lever. This approach allowed them to be far more specific and deliberate, which increased the chance of success for each player as their approach was individualised and hyper-focused. Culture can sometimes be very ethereal and abstract, and Ben said that you need to get specific and discrete for each individual. What behaviours do you want to see, and how can you influence their capability, opportunity or motivation to achieve these? It definitely requires some work up front, but the payoff is huge, and they saw the development of players go through the roof. The next thing that we discussed was reframing and leveraging failure. In any challenging endeavour, the balance of failure to success is heavily skewed towards failure, and you've got to be accepting of that. The research tends to show that you only need to see a glimmer of success every now and again to keep motivated. An example of this is riding a bike or learning to ride one. You suddenly do it once and it changes your whole motivation towards it. And this obviously relates to successful leadership practices within your own company. So alongside accepting you'll fail more than you'll succeed, the ability to emotionally detach yourself from failure and even success at times is really important from a leadership standpoint. And there was a really interesting approach in Olympic sports which Ben spoke about called a pre-mortem, which is in essence preparing for failure up front. So you can be more objective, less emotionally attached when it does happen, and have a plan. We then moved on to Ben's approach and thoughts on how to continuously succeed. And I asked him the question, how sustainable is it to go all in on an endeavour? It was interesting, his answer. He said that in order to be the best in the world, citing the serial Olympic gold medalists and most successful footballers in the world that he's worked with, the one commonality is that they're masters of their craft and are ruthlessly focused on the pursuit of that. They're meticulous and they're obsessed about every detail, but they also possess the ability to shift their energy and focus away from their craft to their family or to other endeavours, and when they're off, they're off. Having said that, he has worked with several athletes who've been suicidal when they retire, and believes it's because their identity is solely who they are as an athlete. So it's less about the ability to actually switch off and more about the ability to switch on to something entirely different, for example, being with your family. Balance isn't the aspiration, in Ben's view. Ego detachment and the ability to be hyper-focused on whatever it is you're doing is the aspiration, and I thought this was mindfulness personified. In regards to leadership lessons for listeners, the best coaches he's worked with teach athletes how to respond to failure and these stressful situations. The challenge threat axis has been known in sport for quite some time, and it ultimately explains how your perception of a situation creates vastly different physical and psychological responses to it. With England, they practice this with penalties, looking at them as a challenge or opportunity rather than a threat to their success. And Ben made it point that it doesn't mean you have to train for every single disaster scenario, but ultimately you need to teach your team how to respond to highly stressful situations as a leader. He mentioned that whilst they scream for this ability to reframe failure in special forces selection, there's a meritocracy within football where you can't get to the top playing for one of the best clubs in the world without having developed it to a certain extent. But he does believe that how you respond to any situation is a dynamic, fluctuating entity, providing the example of a burglar and the baseball bat scenario, where you may respond differently depending on how your day has been. So there's a natural screening process which takes place in sport, that's apparent, but the environment and culture you have can provide individuals with more opportunities to further expose and understand their ability to reframe failure. Ultimately, coaches and leaders have the task of finding the right balance in their team. As an example, do you have a team of complete warriors who run headfirst into challenge, or do you have maybe tactical ninjas who will sit in the background waiting for others to run? There's never a situation without risk or consequence, but it's about knowing what those risks are and being comfortable stepping into them. That's a coach's and leader's job. The final points that Ben spoke about was how it's really crucial just to celebrate your wins. His best moments that he reported were beating Germany at Wembley and seeing his brother and his wife singing Sweet Caroline, having beaten Denmark in the semis. Alongside this, seeing the fruits of the England football staff's labour in observing culture change towards training genuinely brought a tear to his eye. But in reality, he was very humble and said that the seeds were planted long before his time and he was just fortunate to see them blossom. To finish off, Ben talked about the 5 most important things for a high-performing team, and in his opinion, they are the 5 C's: clarity, consistency, confidence, competence, and contribution. So I hope there's been some nice insights there for yourselves and some takeaways that you can apply immediately. The 3 key takeaways that I'd like to draw out from that are: number 1, identity eats culture for breakfast. You need to understand who you are. Everything else is a byproduct of this. It can't be that you say you're one thing and you behave in a different way, or you aren't who you say you are. People will see straight through it. The next key takeaway is to have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and it's so often spoken about but so often missed. You need to understand your people in order to understand what they need. Then you can compassionately challenge them. The third and final key takeaway is to reframe and leverage failure. You're going to fail a hell of a lot more than you'll win, and you're missing a huge growth opportunity if you don't leverage this. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation and those takeaways and insights. Thanks as always for listening, and I'm looking forward to catching up again soon.